Alright, so let's talk about patch 10.14. It is kind of a biggest patch. There is a lot changing compared to the previous patch where a lot of small incremental changes were made. Instead, this patch we get a avalanche of massive buffs and a handful of fairly significant nerfs. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Some system changes to start. There's a couple, really two big system changes. First is Nikos. So, one of the issues with Nikos is pretty much only valuable once you start getting into 4-cost champions. Pretty much never, you almost never see Nikos used before you get to the 4-cost. You might see it occasionally when you're trying to 3-star a 3-cost, but you almost always end up saving your Nikos to like the late mid game or the end game. Why is this a problem? This is a problem because in the early game you can get dropped in Nikos and you would have infinitely rather had gold. It is very problematic. It's significant handicap when you get a Nikos in the early game instead of gold. Now in the late game that doesn't matter. You can get a Nikos in the late game and be like, hey, I can use this to 2-star 5 cost, 2-star 4 cost. And it's like, fine, that's great. But when you get in the early game, you just end up saving it. You don't end up using it in the early game. There's not a lot of value in using a Nikos in the early game compared to the late game where the power level increase from getting that 2-star 4 cost, 2-star 5 cost is very significant. So, in order to balance that out, they're going to add gold into Nico boxes. So if you were going to get a Nikos, you would also now get gold along with that. That's actually a really big buff. It makes getting Nikos like not terrible in the early game. So this is a change I very much welcome. The next change, ties. Big change in tiebreakers. So the way tiebreakers currently work in the game is that when you take the final damage, you die. And when you die, determine your place in the rankings of that particular game. Now it is going to be determined by life. So, here is the new order. When multiple players die in the same round, first, the one with the least negative life total gets the highest ranking. So, if you died at -2 life and another guy died at -5 life, you would be placed above them. If that number is tied, it is whoever had the most health in the previous round. So basically, whoever lost the most health in that particular round, if you are tied. And lastly, if both of those are tied, it becomes an RNG fest. I know there's some people that are like, why is this RNG period? I'm going to be honest, this will probably rarely ever happen. This is actually very rare. The most common situation where I suspect that would happen is when your entire board gets wiped. So you have 2 players that get completely wiped off the face of the earth, kill 0 champions, and take max damage when they both started at the same life. So it's probably a pretty rare situation that this comes up. So why was this implemented? Because everyone hated the way it worked before. It gave an advantage to people who were running builds that were specifically designed to sustain life, but probably more significant is that this was kind of a pay-to-win feature. There were certain maps that you could purchase that had further diagonals that your little legend could run to. And by being able to run in those corners, it took longer for the damage to actually reach that little legend, and you could like extend out by like 2 to 3 seconds before you would die. So, and that was meaningful. If like 3 people died in a round and you ended up being the last one, I mean, that's 3 placements above where you were going to be. That's very relevant in terms of gaining some rank. Lastly, galaxy changes. New galaxy, dwarf planet, where the first and last rows, so the top and bottom rows of every board is disabled. So it's season 1. It's set 1, essentially. You're playing on a set 1 board now. And in return, we lose little legends. Everyone flamed little legends. I'm like, whatever. I actually didn't hate little legends. It just meant you had the high roller play a much faster build, and people. The problem was the meta didn't really allow that in the last set, so everyone kind of just flamed on it. All right, traits. First big change. Big change to the Star Guardians. So the change to Star Guardians, to put it simply, the mana sharing mechanic of Star Guardians is being weakened, but the mana cost is in all the Star Guardians is being buffed. So it's easier for them to individually cast spells, but the Star Guardian trait is weaker. So there's a few that are worth pulling out here and taking a look at because their changes are most significant. The first one being Nico. So Nico, I don't know if people realize this. Nico had one of the highest mana costs in the game. Mostly because her spell was essentially Demolitionist GP, but like weak, smaller, because it stuns and does tons of damage. So that's been reduced by its total cost by a third. Takes the same amount of time to initially cast, but they reduced the total cost by 50. This is going to get cast a lot. I'd say this is the second biggest buff to Star Guardians, because the next one I'm going to talk about is probably even bigger. But this is a huge buff to Star Guardian Frontline. Star Guardian Frontline is its weakest point. That's usually where Star Guardian gets blown up, is the fact that it has no frontline. Its only frontline is Nico. You literally throw Nico out in front, put a GA and whatever defensive items you can find, and hope she lasts for a while. But now it's not just that she can last for a while, but she can cast a lot. And because this spell stuns, it's going to buy a lot of time in Star Guardian builds. The other big change, and this one to me is amazing. Well, it's even more amazing later. Syndra. So Syndra went from costing 60 mana to 40. We've had our issues in this current set with things costing 40 mana. Ziggs has been riding a roller coaster of mana cost because his spell was too easy to cast. Syndra is the carry for Star Guardians, and her spell is becoming significantly easier to cast. I look for these two combined to really raise the power level of Star Guardian. Like, really raise the power of Star Guardian. It's going to actually be a okay build to run. The rest of these changes aren't too significant. The Janna alt change is probably the other one that's a little big, but we'll pass on that. You can look through these yourself. The big ones are Nico and Syndra. Other traits. So Celestial. So Celestial lost Kassadin. And pretty much no build played Celestial. Like, not even Celestial 2 after that. Once Kassadin left, there was very little reason to play Celestial. So Celestial is getting a buff at 2. It's 2, 4, and a big buff at 6. The reason it's getting a big buff at 6 is because you need a Celestial Orb, because there is no 6 Celestial. This is big enough to maybe not actually be a memeable build. If you get a Celestial Orb and 6 Celestials, I don't know exactly what that will look like. I assume it's probably snipers, maybe? I don't really know what it looks like. But self-healing 150% of your auto attack damage is actually a lot. You're actually healing more than you're dealing damage, and if you're wiping boards, then people probably aren't wiping you back. So I actually look to maybe see 6 Celestial. It would be interesting to watch out for. But more importantly, 2 is probably more playable now. There used to be a handful of builds that ran 2 Celestial where you would run like an Ashe and a Lulu in your build just to get the 2 Celestial. 20% is pretty relevant. I think you'll see a lot more Celestial splashing into your builds. Cybernetic gets a slight nerf at both 3 and 6. This is probably something they should have done when they released Vayne, but they didn't. I'm not quite sure why, but better late than never. Sorcerer spell power. So 4 source and 6 source is very strong, so it's getting nerfed. Pretty simple stuff. They can't really nerf 2, because if they nerf 2, they nerf the early game source builds. There won't be any like source openers you can really use if they nerf 2. So they nerf 4 and 6. Champion balance. The first big one. Jarvin. Jarvin is in a weird spot. So Jarvin is kind of this support unit with a frontline trait that's supposed to be placed in the front line. It's very weird. He's awkward to play because his ult is a support ult. It increases the attack speed of your units. But at the same time, his class is Protector. So he's Darkstar. So he's supposed to be your like Darkstar feeding frontline. So if he instantly dies, he never ults, which he regularly did because he wasn't very good. So he's getting a whole bunch of buffs. Buffing the mana cost so that he both will ult sooner and ult more. Buffing his damage, and most importantly, buffing his health so he can actually be a frontliner. Not that I think 50 health is really that meaningful. The bigger change is his ult attack speed boost is very, very big. It's big. A lot of people were talking about the Jarvin buffs, like Jarvin is going to be very popular in the early game and like shredder based comps. I don't know because he's never really been a significant part of any build outside of just using his ult to give things a speed buff. So I would think that this mana change combined with this ult speed buff is going to make him fairly relevant in the game now and allow you to play more of the shredder comp and maybe even keep him in your Darkstar and play Darkstar 6 more often. I don't know. Darkstar is a weird build. You just kind of throw shit around and like it works sometimes, and when the game says it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Other changes, Xayah is not the early game carry anymore. So she's getting an attack speed buff. There were other early game carries that were just outclassing her. So hopefully this will make her more play. Like I said, this combined with Jarvin buffs, where Caitlyn's currently at in the game, it's pretty easy to see that Shredder is likely going to be a build in the next patch that people play. Whether or not it's the build to play, I don't know. Another change, very welcome change, I might add, Mordekaiser. So Mordekaiser getting an HP buff, and the damage on his ult is being increased at all levels. So I'm kind of a Mordekaiser lover. If you've ever made a Mordekaiser that ulted and then never died and just his ult hit like 3 different things, you would be a Mordekaiser lover too, because Mordekaiser can do a shitload of damage with his ult for no reason at all. The problem with Mordekaiser is he could really only see play in 2 builds. When you were using him as a Vanguard, so he was your frontliner, and in Darkstar, where he was your only frontliner. So he often was just kind of outclassed by other Vanguards because they had better frontline abilities, notably like Nautilus and Leona. Nautilus and Leona were probably better Vanguards than Mordekaiser. But maybe we see. Oh, and it was definitely outclassed by Jace, because Jace outclasses pretty much all Vanguards except Wukong. Wukong's very good. Like Jace and Wukong are your 2 best Vanguards. So hopefully, this is probably mostly a buff to Darkstar, where you almost have to run Mordekaiser as a frontliner. So hopefully Darkstar is better. Rockin's getting an extra 100 health. Don't know why, but Rockin is getting an extra 100 health. I don't know why. I thought he was fine. Yasuo mana decreased by 10. We're still trying to figure out how Yasuo is going to be played after they nerfed him to the ground by making it so he doesn't target things with the most items anymore. I wish they'd just bring that back, to be honest with you. Because now he just hits something at random, and it's like, whatever, okay. Tier 3 champion changes. Ashe. So this is another pretty significant change. The 2 most important parts here being an attack speed increase. So Ashe has, for some reason, in my opinion, just attacks really slow. So seeing her get an attack speed boost is actually pretty nice. I don't think it's enough to make her a carry. She's still going to be kind of a utility sniper in your snipers builds. Why is she going to be a utility sniper? Because they also buffed her ability stun duration to now at 2-star it's 3 seconds instead of 2 seconds. If you somehow manage 4-star, it's 3-star, it's 4 seconds. This is getting kind of long, and it's an AOE. This is like Kassadin levels of pain. So I do suspect that we will see a good bit more sniper builds that play Ashe as your kind of more utility sniper, just stunning things. Ezreal nerfs. Every build plays Ezreal because Ezreal's a blaster for Blaster 2 and a Chrono for Chrono whatever you're running. So everyone plays Ezreal. And his main purpose was to provide infinity utility because he made everything cost more mana. There's really not much else to say about Ezreal. He provided infinity utility to pretty much every build in terms of what traits he activated to his spell. So seeing him nerfed is not really that surprising to me. Will you still play him? Well, yeah, because that ult's ridiculous, and he's Chrono and Blaster, so he's going to enable both of those. That said, there is a possibility that in Blaster you might end up playing the Space Pirate one, whose name just completely slipped my mind. You might end up playing him more. It would basically come down to, do you need Chrono or not? That spell probably has a little more utility than Ezreal's, and casting Ezreal's is going to become much more difficult. Karma. Karma's shield is getting a buff, and the attack speed boost is going to the moon. Literally to the moon. At 1-star and 2-star... Well, the 1-star buff is huge. The 2-star buff is fairly big. Again, this is pretty much a straight buff to Dark Star. It's also... It should make people think more whether or not they want to run Soraka or Karma, depending on what their build is, where they are currently at with their carry, when they want to run 2 Mystics. So if you want to run 2 Mystics, you almost always run Lulu. But now the option becomes, do you want to run Soraka or Karma? And that's mostly going to depend upon the current state of your carry and whether your carry needs more protection or more attack speed. Nico, I suspect that this really isn't a nerf and that this is kind of more of an equals in most situations. This might even actually be a buff to reduce... I mean it's a straight buff, but... what was I getting at? Oh, I read this as 50 to 45. It's... Yeah, we're increasing the frontline capability of Nico, which, like we said before, the Nico changes is very significant to Star Guardians. Yeah, sorry, I distracted myself there. Shaco now ults more. Again, buff the Dark Star. Shaco kind of went in the tank a while back. The biggest change to him right now is that Infinity Edge doesn't do what it used to do and make him kind of just destroy everything. So having him ult more is a good change. Syndra, remember how we said that Syndra now casts all the time? Also, her 2-star and 3-star variant get damage buffs. Go play Star Guardians, kids. It's going to be pretty good. Probably the biggest nerf this patch went to Vayne. Vayne went from 60 AD to 50. That's going into the tank. I don't think you can play Vayne carry anymore. I think Vayne carry is done. Like, now Vayne is just something you hold on to keep 6, and you probably just give Vayne Echo items. Probably not even Echo. I mean, you used to give that to Lucian. I don't know really what you put on Vayne. You probably don't even put anything on. You give all your Echo carry stuff on Lucian and just go from there. Yeah, Vayne is not your carry in Cyber anymore. I can almost guarantee you that. This AD nerf is too big. So there was a lot of talk that V's ult did way too much damage. I'm like, okay. So, yeah, Vayne's ult's getting nerfed, so it doesn't, like, instantly blow things up. Speaking of things blowing things up, so Fizz kind of came into place in set 10.13, where Fizz basically got flexed into nearly every build. Mostly because Fizz does a ton of damage, and Fizz also blew up Rebels, which was a very popular build in 10.13. So, Fizz getting a damage nerf across the board on his ult. I can't really blame him. The other big change, and this one is gigantic. This is a buff to the point of, I think this might be a tiny bit overtuned. Aurelia has... I mean, you can just look at these numbers and just laugh at how hilariously large these numbers are becoming. So first, extra 100 health. It's a lot more survivability. Extra 1580. Remember how I was saying that Vayne's AD nerf was significant? It's 15. more frontline armor, more magic resist, and the 1-star variant gets a buff to the damage. This is actual insanity to me that they would put such significant buffs. I agree with most of them. Probably where I didn't agree with was how big they went for an AD buff and the HP buff. These two I agree with, because a common thing that would happen with Aurelia was Aurelia would kind of get blown up by something when she wasn't ulting. You often otherwise would have to... There were basically two ways to kill Aurelia. One was to catch her when she wasn't ulting off on everything, and the other was to stun her. You can't kind of blow her up anymore with these values. These values are big. Like, these are basically like frontline tank values that they've put in here. I think Cyber's going to be pretty good on your Aurelia carry. But like we said in the previous patch with Aurelia is kind of a risky carry because you're relying a lot on her ability to just ult all over the field. And if she isn't ulting all over the field, you're probably losing that fight. So, I'd still play it. Aurelia seems really good. Aurelia seems really good, guys. I suspect that most of these changes were to balance out the fact that IE went into the tank in terms of the potential damage that IE was dealing. So now they needed to kind of balance that out, and this is what we get. More big buffs. Jhin. Damage and attack speed buff to Jhin. Fine. 4th shot damage buff. Also, launched to the moon. So Jhin is kind of the risky carry. He doesn't move. He just kind of stands where he is and can get blown up upon because he just kind of stands there. His placement on the battlefield tends to be very predictable. So in order to balance that out, what they've done is they've increased his damage by a lot. So you have to protect your Jhin. This is probably what makes Darkstar come back again. I don't know if the Astro Sniper is coming back, aka Space Shrooms, because Teemo and Astro didn't change at all. I do think Teemo and Jhin pair very well together, especially with this increase in attack speed and the 4th shot damage buff. So that build could come back, but for now, this is probably just Darkstar coming back. Jinx getting a tiny attack speed nerf. Jinx is a weird thing to be nerfing because they've basically nerfed Jinx every patch for the past 3 patches. And if they continue to nerf her, she's going to disappear, and that's a lot of builds that die if Jinx goes away. So they kind of have to... They can't just, like, blow up Jinx. They have to be, like, very incremental with Jinx to make sure that they don't, like, instantly blow up blasters and rebels, which is 2 very, very different builds that you can run for, but take up a pretty significant slosh of the meta. Riven's getting a shield nerf again. If you ever build a Death Kappa Riven, you understand what this is about. It can become impossible to kill Riven at times. Victor is getting a damage nerf because Victor does too much damage. Pretty simple stuff here. Victor does a ton of damage. So they are going to be nerfing the second part of his death ray damage. Aurelion Soul. It was very, very common in the upper tiers of ranked to see people flexing in an ASOL, because this ability of mana draining was very, very strong. So it's getting toned down, and quite a bit at 2-star. So I don't think you're going to see the flexing as much as you used to, but you'll probably still see... You're probably just going to be seeing this now more in your standard Rebels build. Lastly, Janna. To be honest, I never really saw a lot of Janna play, but they are nerfing the attack speed bonus that Janna gave. I actually never saw a lot of Janna being played. Even in like the upper tiers matches that I watch, it was just kind of like, okay, I'm playing Janna because I can't play something else. So I'm not quite sure what this one's about, but Janna's getting an attack speed nerf. Or the attack speed bonus part of her spell is getting nerfed. Big change, Urgot. So, we've all been complaining about Urgot. Everyone and their brother has complained about Urgot. Urgot is still going to one-shot things. Let's be clear about that. Urgot is still going to one-shot things. But his targeting priority has been changed, and how he targets has been changed. And most importantly, to most people, where'd it go? It doesn't eat GA anymore. That was kind of my big issue with it, was that it ate GA. So, let's go through this one by one. He's getting some additional armor and magic resist, because if you targeted him, he died. He didn't move. He just died. Which was very frustrating to play against when you tried to position to target him and nothing could target him. Anytime you had a build, people were very protective of their Urgots and like to keep them on their benches where Thresh could pull them. He's getting an attack range nerf, which means he has to run up to things. Part of the reason why he's getting these armor and magic resist buffs. The total mana cost is increasing by only 10. Don't get too cranky about that. His targeting priority now goes to, he used to be, he would attack the furthest thing within his attack range with his spell. Now he just flat out targets the furthest thing away, which usually means whatever carry you put in the corner. But now, along with that, whatever that line hits first is what it's going to hit. So if he shoots to the corner for an intended target and you have another unit in the way and it hits that other unit, he's going to eat that instead. So why this is relevant? Because he probably is not going to actually be eating the corners you carry or whatever trash you put in the corner. He's likely going to be eating frontliners now, almost always. And that's kind of dangerous. If he can quickly get off an ult and eat up your tanky frontliner, your build is going to get blown up. Especially builds that rely on tanky frontliners. He will utterly destroy Vanguard Mystic. Vanguard Mystic's going to get blown up by this change. Just calling it now. Those tanky frontline builds that you make, this is going to be a big impact against those. Like I said, GA now works against him. So if he eats something with GA, it now reses. This was a pretty big issue amongst the community. I think even among people who didn't really have an issue with Urgot, they had an issue with this, him eating GA. Like my understanding was they wanted Urgot to be a counter to GA, whereas everyone was kind of like, why does GA need a counter in the first place? Mana reduction. So each time he casts, he reduces the total mana cost required. That's been reduced because it could get out of control kind of quick. But also, this one I think people aren't really tracking as important as it probably is. The time it takes for him to reel in and kill something now scales with the star level of whatever that unit is. So, or star level of whatever Urgot is. So at 1 star, it takes him 3 full seconds or twice as long to reel something in and eat it. I think that's actually really big because 3 seconds is a long time. That's a good bit of time to have other units actually just finish off Urgot before he eats whatever it is. I think this combined with the GA is very, very significant to balancing out a lot of the issues people have with Urgot. Moving on. So this Giant Slayer change. I've been trying to wrap my head around what exactly is going on here, and here's kind of what I figured out. So, the way Giant Slayer works is that it ends up being 2 instances of damage: your normal damage and your true damage. What they're now going to do, and the thing is, like, it wasn't like really true damage. It was just damage that was added on in the end and called true damage because it was added on at the end of all of the mathing in the background. Which is why they called it true damage, because it, in a sense, was true damage. But it just wasn't calculated the same way. Now what it's going to be is it's going to be like regular auto attack damage. So this means two things. One, that basic auto attack damage is now higher. Like, the total damage is not changing here. That's the big thing to realize. The total damage is not really changing. But that basic auto attack damage is now increasing. Where that is relevant is for, like, Bloodthirster or with Celestial. Things that, like, do extra things based on the amount of damage an ability an auto attack does. So if you hit something and have Celestial and you have a GS, you now get healed for that extra bit instead of that just being like off to the side as true damage. The other side of that is it's now no longer 2 instances of damage. It's just 1 instance of damage. I can't work out where that is meaningful, but that is meaningful. I just don't know why. I think there are some things that trigger with multiple instances of damage. I just don't know them off the top of my head. So, like I said, it's now 1 instance of damage that is higher. Total's the same, rather than being 2 instances of damage. Okay? That's all this does. It's a lot to explain for not really doing that much. Next, the Ionic Spark's getting nerfed. Ionic Spark is probably the best item in the game. It's pretty much a slam make in the past 3 patches because it is very, very good. So it's getting nerfed from 50% magic resist reduction to 40%. Bug fixes. I don't think we actually have that much to change on bug fixes. Outside this one's hilarious. So polymorph units while stunned used to still hop around. They will no longer do that. Sorry, guys. And I don't think there were really other changes. Vane's alt now properly procs with Blade Master. That's kind of irrelevant now because Vane's been destroyed. So, sorry. And that seems to be about it. So let's kind of go back to the top. Go back through this image. Can I open it? Does it work? Hey, it does work. So let's kind of go back over all of the changes so we can look at it as a whole as to what is happening. So the big changes here are coming to all of the Darkstar units, all of the Star Guardian units, and some of the Celestial units. So the obvious objection is you can play Darkstar, you can play Shredder, and you can play Star Guardians now. Those are all going to be pretty good builds. In terms of builds that have been destroyed, you're not going to do Vayne carry on Cyber anymore. On the plus side, Aurelia is now a god, so you can just kind of run Aurelia carry from now on and be happy with that. Cyber got a tiny bit of a nerf. It's not very meaningful because they should have done it anyway when they released Vayne, because they had an extra Cyber champion, so Cyber 6 was just much easier to activate. So we should be pleased with this. Other builds that might come out, like I said, the big thing is that it looks like Shredder's going to be back. And the thing with Shredder being back is that if people are going to Shredder, you generally don't just have one hyper roll build. I think set 2 was a little weird in that we had only one hyper roll build. I think you're going to see more than one hyper roll build come out. I'm just not quite sure what it will look like or what the key units are going to be. It could very well be a Star Guardian hyper roll. We can go back to Candyland. But it's pretty clear to me that the Shredder hyper roll will be back this set. It's also pretty clear to me, I think Darkstar will be pretty relevant. The buffs to Karma, Mordekaiser, and Jarvin are like too big to ignore. You're going to be playing Mordekaiser more. You're going to be playing Karma more. And you 100% will be running more Jhin carries in your life. The Nico buffs are ginormous. Like, not only will this be like a Star Guardian buff, it's a Protector Mystic buff too. If you can 3-star in Nico in Protector Mystic, that's probably going to be pretty good. Other things, Blaster's going to be a little weaker, but I don't think that's really that meaningful. I think Blaster's still going to be pretty good, even with the Ezreal nerfs. The one I'm debating on is whether Astro Snipers will come back. The Jhin buffs make it likely, but I don't know. The real question becomes, is 6 Darkstar better than Astro Sniper? And if it is, then Astro has like no place in the game. Sorry. I don't know how you play Astro if you're not going to play Astro Snipers. was like the most obvious build in the game. So that should about do it for this. So I hope to see you in a few games, and I'm going to sign off. Peace.